So, hello again. We are live with our third session today. Sorry for being late 3 minutes, but we get right into it. So basically, this session is called Competitive Edge through EUDR, what is required to succeed. So what Filippo and I will guide you through is basically what do you need on an organizational level, what do you need to look at basically to as a precondition for successful EUDR implementation, and then we will also look at what requirements should a software tool have that you want to use to implement EUDR compliance successfully in your organization. And since we're already a bit late, I don't even want to say much more and hand it over directly to Filippo and the presentation.
Okay, thank you, Andreas. First of all, I would like to thank Lavio for inviting us to take part of this event today and to giving us the opportunity to explore UDR topics. And I also like to thank all the speakers who presented for me. Okay, let's start. As Andreas said before, the purpose of this video is to provide you with insight and stimulation about the fundamental aspect of the regulation. Okay, we will explore how to achieve an efficient and straightforward alignment by following a clear path of preparation. Okay, so we will discuss the topic in the following way. Okay, well, a brief presentation, okay, of me and video, the company I work for. Then I will give you an overview of some highlights of UDR, okay, and a path to the compliance, okay. We will then talk about the importance of preparatory activities, okay, for compliance, and the formalization of a due diligence system as required by the regulation. And finally, Andreas will talk about the requirements regarding the software solution to facilitate the compliance path. Okay, so I probably mentioned, no, I didn't mention, but I'm Filippo Barreto, Sustainability Manager and the Sustainability Innovation Team in BDO. Okay, BDO is one of the world's leading network for auditing services with to which additional collateral services such advisory and consulting are needed. BDO has around 1,200 professionals in Italy, and sorry. So the Sustainability Innovation Team, one is BDO's area for sustainability consulting services, the national and multinational company. Our team consists in more than 50 professionals, including our core partner. Today, we are here to talk about due diligence, but we offer sustainability services across the board, okay, including ESG reporting, risk assessment, strategic management of sustainability, and so on. So, okay, the speech goal. So we the goals of the speech is to highlight some important aspects of the EUDR compliance pathway. Okay, we will illustrate the pathway aimed to achieve the compliance with the regulation. In particular, we will discuss about the gap analysis and roadmap. Okay, activities oriented toward defining the company needs in order to achieve the compliance. We will clarify what we mean for the due diligence system and what documents and documentation need to be produced by the company. And we will find, as I said before, and then just talk about the importance of software solutions for compliance. So let's start. In the slide, we find a timeline representation. I would say very personal and synthetic concerning the legislative panorama, with a focus on the ODR topic. Okay, we are talking about today. As we can see, the timeline goes back a long way to the 2000s when the regulation standards and directive were imposed in the European scenario to protect against the reputational risk that company has to manage. The EUDR regulation is part of a wider scenario that goes back a long way and derives from the drive that European Union has defined as the Green New Deal that should lead Europe to be the first carbon neutral continent by 2050. In order to reach this important goal, Europe has adopted a series of regulations that obviously do not only concern the fight against deforestation, but in general everything that contributes and who can also contribute to change to climate change mitigation. Deforestation, so, is only one of the causes contributing to climate effects. So we can therefore define that the current regulatory framework has very complex. So let's now talk to the European Union deforestation regulation. So the European Union has enacted the regulation on 31 May 2023. Within the regulation legal framework, you know that regulation, unlike directive, enter into force directly into member states without the need for transposition. The initial deadline for complying with the obligation of the regulation has been revised through the extension that brings deadlines to the 3rd December of 2025 for SME companies. It is therefore necessary to address the issue in a very timely manner. For non-SME company, are given extra 6 months to comply to the regulation. So the regulation prohibits placing to the market, making available and exporting from the European Union of products that have directly or indirectly caused deforestation or forest degradation after the 31 December of 2020. Okay. The regulation prohibits the release and export of goods belonging to 7 macro categories. Okay, refers to cattle, cocoa, coffee, oil palm, rubber, soya, and food. The ban is in place unless the following 3 conditions are met. The product must be zero deforestation, the legislation of the country of production must be respected, and a declaration of due diligence is present on the part of the operator or trader. Compliance with these 3 macro requirements allow the company to be compliant. We have now seen how of some implication of the regulation, but the complexities of which go far beyond that. So, considering the multitude of obligations and requirements dictated by the regulation, it is necessary to adopt a linear and well-defined pathway to reach the compliance. Okay, so in the slide we propose an end-to-end path to EUDR compliance. Okay, it's crucial for companies to be aware of their maturity level with respect to the regulation and its requirement. Okay, so in other words, what gap needs to be filled in order to achieve the compliance. Identifying the company's obligation and how it is impacted by the regulation is fundamental to substantially defining the efforts required and the action to put in place to close the gap within the deadlines defined by the regulation. Okay, we therefore see these 2 preparatory activities in the first block on the left, in the blue box. Once the obligation has been understood and the roadmap prepared, so the 2 preparatory activities are the gap analysis and the roadmap to the compliance. Okay, so once the obligation has been understood and the roadmap prepared, we now see the next step of that collection, risk assessment, and compliance, and the concomitant definition of the due diligence system. Okay. For this activity, highlighted in green, is necessary a great experience on it. It is therefore crucial, especially for companies that are very complex and handle a large amount of data, to use a platform such TradeAware that can facilitate the achievement of the goals. The platform cover 3 macro areas. Start with supporting company in collecting suppliers' data for questionnaires. In the next step, the risk assessment, the risk of deforestation is assessed using developable technology, and in addition to the deforestation risk, further supplier related risk factors of a legal nature are also assessed. In the third step, due diligence certificates are not only created in a automatic manner, but are also sentenced to traces with which is the European Union ET system. Parallel to these three activities, the regulation requires us to define a due diligence system. Technically, we mean the entire system of procedures, policies, and records necessary to formalize and integrate the processes and scope within the company. Okay, let's now have a look in more details to the first step, what I defined before as preparatory activities, so the gap analysis and roadmap. Okay. Wait a second, because I don't see. Okay. So the starting point of this part is what I call awareness. Okay. So the understanding of the AC situation, which in addition to identify regulatory gaps, serves precisely to make the company confident, not only about the information it has inside the company, but also of everything that can be enhanced in terms of internal processes and procedures. So they're essential to take a picture of the current situation of the company. For this reason, it's important to understand how the company fits into the regulation. In fact, we need to understand whether the company is an operator or a trader or both. So the operator is the one who places regulated product on the European markets for the first time for export. The trader is any actor in the supply chain who sells regulated product already in the European market. And with respect to how the company configure itself, so trader or operator, companies have different obligations, also depending on their size. The heaviest burden certainly falls on the category of the operator and large companies. In fact, the subject companies, before placing the product on the market, must be carried out the path described above, and therefore the due diligence activity. The company also has a duty to continuously monitor and update his due diligence system and activity. It also has an obligation to review the due diligence system at least once a year. The company must then report and retain all the documentation inside their system. But also all the information collected, not only the information about the risk assessment, for example, but also all the information collected in the acquisition phase, so about the supply chain, and all the information the company collects has to be stored. On the other hand, we have the trader, who has a whole series of exemptions, because it's assumed that before the trader, so there is an operator who has carried out the activities required by the regulation. So now let's start in the slide. Let's see the gap analysis. Okay, the slide shows the path to reach the awareness, as I told earlier, and applicability to the regulation. So in this phase, we also do an initial analysis of the product and materials, and we can also check. We have, for example, customer code to understand which material and product fall under the regulation. We then assess the company's maturity for compliance, because the regulation has also an impact on their organizational processes. Okay, for example, how the organization set up a system for mapping supplier and how they are managed. Generally, also consider the entire supply chain and its mapping. So it's a complete analysis about the company, supply chain, and how it respect the regulation. Let's now take a look on the roadmap. Okay, so the next 10 of the preliminary activity are concluded. Let's now talk about the roadmap. With the roadmap based on information gathered in the previous step, so in gap analysis, we formulate a progressive modular approach aimed to achieving compliance. This activity is very, very important. So this roadmap considers not only the relevant product, obligations, supply chain, processes, but also the specific business needs and the requirements of the company. We therefore design a specific and customized path for the individual company oriented to enhance the company's current situation as much as possible, but including, or obviously, all the requirements of the regulation. So now we are going to see the due diligence system. Okay, parallel so to the activity of data gathering, risk assessment, compliance, the regulation requires us to define and adopt internally and adequately communicate outside the organization in transparency, hold the defined processes and the due diligence system the company builds. So on one side, we have operational and practical processes and activity we have to do. On the other side, we have more formal obligation, which we are going to look in the next slide. Okay, so the Article 12 of the regulation requires us to implement a due diligence system. Okay, by due diligence system, we mean all that documents, okay, such as procedures, policy that formalize the processes and the actions adopted by the company. As you can see in the due diligence system, 3 documents must be drawn out. Okay, a policy, procedure, and records. A policy in which we set out the principles by which the company operates and intends to operate with respect to the station. A procedure document in which we describe how the process implemented within the company in order to be able to draw up the declaration, and a report in which we describe the results obtained with a view also to the continuous improvement of our process and the improvement of results obtained. Now let's have a look on the 3 types in detail of the 3 documents. So let's start talking about policy. Okay, the policy document is not explicitly required, okay, from a regulatory point of view. In fact, in the Article 12, the regulation simply required an adoption of a set of procedures that formalize the process as well. But at the same time, we are still talking about a due diligence system. So it is first necessary for me to define a policy. Therefore, it is important to start by defining the principle of the company's value and the organization commitment to deforestation, by also setting goals that tend so the company intends to achieve. For the reason, it's necessary to carry out the action in order to draw up a policy that precisely define the organization commitment. So we must, first of all, we must carry out an analysis of the company's asset documentation. We need to do this to understand what commitment the organization has made with respect to other topics, sustainability topics. For example, their policy, certification, I don't know, for example, a quality certification or other ISO environmental certification, sustainability reporting, and so on. Secondly, we have to suggest to conduct interviews with the key manager of internal functions. We do this because our approach is geared toward understanding what objective and goals the company wants to set. And the company intends to make itself accountable for the requirements of the regulation. We have to go and identify the relevant topics, not only within the company, but also within the whole supply chain. In fact, the regulation does not only talk about deforestation and forest degradation. The regulation within its risk assessment article talks about and tells us about other topics to assess risk. The regulation talks about to consider risks related to human, for example, to human rights, respect for indigenous people, but also about to consider corruption, falsification of documentation, and other risks. It's very important to understand from the beginning, with respect to the supply chain in which we are, what might be the relevant aspects that should be integrated into the principles and thus considered in the risk calculation, in our risk calculation. Following the assessment of the relevant topic, we conclude the activity within drafting the policy documents and, not less important, the publication of documents. So let's now turn to the procedures required by the Article 12 regulation. In contrast to the policy, the procedure is mandatory document, okay, required. The regulation, in fact, requires us to give a formal structure to everything we have actively done to comply with the regulation, and thus all the processes we have implemented or we are implementing about EUDR. When we are talking about processes and procedures, it is essential that we also define the role and responsibility that the company's internal resources have in order to guarantee the respect and the correct production of the due diligence declaration for the products concerned. For instance, it must be defined who is responsible for that collection, for example, who is the owner of the risk assessment activities, and what tool, for example, must be used to complete, and the company is using to complete the due diligence path. So let's now turn to role and responsibility, okay? Because all known to me are small enterprise are required by the regulation to define an EUDR officer to a management level. Must be formalized inside the procedure, okay? The designation of a responsible person is very important and crucial. He or she has to be the one who must ensure that all the implemented processes are delivering the desired result. And if it's not, he or she has to introduce improvement action in order to achieve the goal with respect to the regulation. So let's now take a look at the best practice for correcting draft and procedure. We have to define the process macro phases from data collection to the drafting of the final documents. Obviously, for each phase of macro phases, we have to detail all the underlying process flows. So the data that are needed to perform the individual activities necessary in the system, I said before, and the data flow of the information. At the same time, we must meticulously and unequivocally define that the responsibility and the ownership of the defined activities and processes, and define also, that's very important, the time frames for completing the activity inside the procedures. Then follow the definition of monitoring and mitigation activity. Those activities are very crucial and important since the legislator require us to base the deforestation analysis by calculating risk. Okay, so risk is therefore the most important and fundamental element of the process, and the regulation in fact requires us to update the assessment annually. At the stage, through monitoring activities, we monitor not only the progress of the operation activities, but above all the result and crucial issues that emerge by monitoring. So the monitoring of the result is fundamental in order to then properly activate a remediation mechanism to mitigate the risk we identified before. We must also define how we intend to manage all the information we collect that are the information that are necessary for the production of the due diligence declaration. And the information must be maintained by the company for 5 years and saved within the systems, the company system. The processes for managing and maintaining data must, of course, be also described in the procedures, of course. We can see on the right part of the slide that the activity of drafting the procedure can be carried out in parallel with the performance of other activity. Once the due diligence process is complete, the procedure can be finalized and approved. But as I said before, the procedure must describe all the processes implemented by the company. Thus, between the performance of information gathering, risk assessment, mitigation, declaration activity, there must be a two-way exchange of information within procedure. Because exchanging of information serves the initial phase of the formalization of the processes, and later, in order to check the process are working correctly, and in the case of the need to modify the processes to make them more efficient, the procedures can also be modified. So this process can be defined as the heart of the due diligence system and is therefore a continuous process in which we carry out operational activity on one side and formalize them on the other. Okay, we conclude our discussion with, of the due diligence system with the last part concerning the reports required by the regulation. Article 12 of the regulation requires us to produce reports each year detailing the results of the entire due diligence process. I'm talking the deforestation due diligence process. For example, I can describe what analysis carried out resulted in zero risk of deforestation, and therefore I was able to move or my product. On the other hand, if the risk of deforestation for some products is found to be high, I have to describe the mitigation, the mitigation measures put in place to mitigate the risk. The risk discovered. The purpose of the report is to make disclosure to all stakeholder of the activities carried out and the results obtained. In conclusion, we are faced with a very complex regulation that is part of a very broad regulation landscape in which the topic of sustainability, due diligence plays an incredibly important and crucial role. So, therefore, it's very important to have a vision linked not to a single regulation or directive, but to have an integrated 360-degree approach, okay, view. With this, I will conclude my speech, and then over to Andreas, who will talk about the importance of a software solution to reach the compliance with EUDR and to conclude the compliance path we described.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Yeah, so can we go to the next slide, please? Or maybe two ahead. Yeah, so exactly this one. Yeah, so basically what I want to now zoom into is how to tie this together. So basically, Filippo went into the things you have to do in your organization, what you have to pay attention to, how do you identify the products and so on. And then in the end, what I want now to talk about is what are the things that you need to operationalize this in your organization on the software side. So basically what we did when we developed TradeAware was to look at what does the law require from companies in the end, and what information is needed and where does it sit in the organization, sort of, and how to combine these two so that you can basically do the whole process with the software. So we've developed TradeAware as an end-to-end solution to EUDR. So it basically covers the data gathering under Article 9 and the risk assessment and mitigation 10 and 11, and then proving product compliance. So basically the submission of the due diligence statement. All of this, in theory, you could do without software. Basically, you can call your supplier, get the data via fax and copy them into an Excel sheet. But of course, it makes it easier to get EUDR implemented, EUDR compliance implemented in your organization at scale. If we can go to the next slide, please. Filippo, could you advance the slides by one, please? Perfect. Okay, we have the red flags. They were supposed to appear later, but that's okay. So basically, the first point we had in this chain was the data gathering under Article 9. So basically, what you want from your software solution is that you can get the requirement data, the information requirements, which is the geolocation data and potentially documents in an efficient way from many suppliers. In many cases, what we know is that the information already sits either in the organization or it sits with your suppliers, basically, and you need mechanisms to acquire these. So questions to ask your vendors or the vendor of a software solution for EUDR you're looking at could be, can you collect data across supply chain tiers? Because in some cases, maybe your tier 1 supplier does not have the data you need, but it's one level higher, or maybe 2 or N. So you have to have some delegation system, some way of acquiring data from higher level suppliers. Another very important point is sub-supplier privacy. I think we talked about this also in an earlier session, I think in the first one. Jan mentioned it. So basically, when I get information from my tier 2 supplier or tier 4 supplier, is the contact information that is critical business information for many suppliers revealed to the rest of the supply chain or not? So a good EUDR solution would provide a way to maintain anonymity of those higher tier suppliers, so they don't risk their business just for EUDR compliance, basically. Then the next thing is programmatic collection of data possible. So basically what this means is if supplier information, for example, already sits in your ERP system or supply chain management system, ideally you get it out of there in a programmatic way. That means, for example, via an API, so basically automatically, and to be able to later tie it to shipments. And then lastly, central management of data. So basically, do you have everything in one place that relates to EUDR, or basically do you unite the relevant pieces of information in one place so it can be managed? So the red flags to look out for here, basically, as I said, is silos. So that means no end-to-end solution, and especially information silos. Sub-supplier privacy not protected. Manual data input, of course, a red flag if you manage a more complex supply chain. And then, overwhelming data requests to suppliers. So ideally, you have a system where you can organize it and you don't have to request the same stuff, the same information that you may already have in a different system several times. So then we can move on to the risk assessment. So basically, we know the risk assessment essentially has the EUDR risk assessment, two pillars, so to speak. On the one hand, we see the deforestation risk. On the one hand, we have the legality risk. We spoke about the legality risk a bit on the panel before. Basically, it means, is the production legal in the country of production? Deforestation risk means, has there been deforestation? Has there been land use change from forest to agriculture in the country of production? So why is this relevant? So basically, we touched upon this earlier. There's different ways how you could find out if a plot of land has been deforested or not, and there are different methods basically available on the market. Some of them are, for example, freely available open source data. You could also go to the plot of land and check how old the tree is and so forth. But basically, what is really important is that you check that the method of deforestation risk assessment, so basically what is the software or method of assessing deforestation risk, is in line with what the regulation says. So basically there's different methods in the world about what is deforestation and what is not. EUDR has a very specific one, and no matter what you use, you have to check that the way you're using is using the same way as EUDR has defined it, basically, because otherwise you risk either non-compliance or excluding suppliers who are actually suppliers, who are excluding compliant suppliers by accident, basically. Regarding the legality risk assessment, we've talked about this a little bit in the panel. So basically, we have many production countries with evolving legislation, and it's very important to check if they are in the end humans, local human experts who check the legality of documents in those countries. Because if you want to be compliant, if you want to do thorough due diligence, you have to be sure that it's not just a checkbox exercise, not just an AI saying flagging compliant, non-compliant, but you want expertise locally. Regarding the deforestation risk assessment, it has to be scalable, and basically the same goes for the legality assessment. Otherwise, you will have run into problems when you scale up your due diligence system. So some red flags to look out for is basically open source data sets on deforestation, which are sometimes not aligned with what the EUDR is actually asking for, leading to bad business outcomes. When you look at companies, one thing to look out for, coming from Liveo, we have dealt with satellite analytics for many years now, and we know it's a very complex and difficult problem to solve. And we know that you need the in-house expertise to solve this problem. So if you look at a company and they don't have anyone who, or just one person who deals with satellite analytics, they might not be able to solve this problem. Similarly, AI first legal risk assessment should be a red flag. Constanze Schweidmann earlier on the panel said it might be a way of getting an overview, but to keep up with the local legislation and many different companies, you should trust experts. And yeah, basically this also ties in with my last red flag. And then if we go to the next one, please. Next slide. Yeah. Proving product compliance. This is actually goes well together with the first one. Basically, you have information in some systems, and in the end, you have to prove your due diligence to the EU by submitting a due diligence statement. So it's important that whatever tool you choose can do this programmatically. So ideally, in an automated, semi-automated way, so you don't have to have manual work, basically. And another thing that is important, it shouldn't be a one-way road, because as we heard earlier, you also need a system of getting reference numbers back from shipments where due diligence has already been carried out. So you basically need a way, like a two-way communication to the EU information system, to really set up a system that grows with your import volume and is somewhat automated or highly automated. So some red flags, again, no ERP integration for transactions data. So you need a way of tying shipments to suppliers, and then tying this to risk assessment, and then tying this to basically the import, to traces, to the EU information system. Manual due diligence system as a submission, I already spoke about this, and you need a way to handle large volumes. And finally, communicating only one way to the EU is not sufficient. You need to have that two-way communication to solve the problem. I rushed through it a little bit because we are out of time. So maybe if we go to the last slide, please, or the second last slide. So here I've summarized a little bit the requirements, the software requirements to look out for on one slide. And you can also scan this QR code to download our guide, which we have published on this. Maybe if we take 5 seconds for that, and then go to the next slide, but we will share the recording anyway. Exactly. So because with this now it's 12 o'clock, we're already at the end of our session. To those of you who answered question, we will who ask questions, we will gather them and try to answer them in one consolidated document. So watch out for the email that is to come. To you, Filippo, thanks a lot for the insightful presentation. And thanks for joining us at EUDR Summit.
Thank you. Thank you to you, Andrea.
We will be back after a short lunch break, and thanks everyone for tuning in on this session. Thank you.
Thank you for everyone.